Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and to how to build a forest in The Sims 4. Now I am making this video assuming you've seen the one before. However, if you're already fairly familiar with landscaping in The Sims 4, you shouldn't have to watch that one first. Our focus today is going to be how to take a lot in The Sims 4 and make it look like it's forested. It'll be a combination of real world information and in-game what's actually going to look good and work for your game. And I also do plan on using Debug today right from the start. Now while I was on the internet today, I came across this super duper handy image from the Michigan Forests Forever Teacher's Guide, which I will link down below. We want the middle trees to look older, the slightly outside trees to look a little bit younger, and then from there we'll move into the undergrowth of the forest with bushes, shrubs, ferns, and then as we move even further away, we'll talk about flowers and things like that. And we are starting that experiment here on a 64 by 64 lot in Windenburg. This will all work a lot better if you already have trees around your lot. If you just start a forest in the middle of nowhere, it's going to look kind of weird. So first things first, open up your cheat bar. This is Control-Shift-C on keyboards and all four trigger buttons on console and type bb.moveObjects. And then we're also going to type in bb.showHiddenObjects and bb.showLiveEditObjects. This will unlock all of the items in the build menu. Next, I'm going to go over here to filter items, and I am just going to choose the pack of the world that I am building in. For me today, that is Get Together. And then I will type debug over here. And now, here are all of the debug items from the world. We can already find some of the trees that are in the background, which is the main reason I'm in here. I believe these three trees make up most of the landscaping in this area, so we'll start with these. Like I was just talking about, we're going to want the largest ones more toward the center of the forest. Now that might not be necessarily the center of your lot. That's going to be more toward the edge of the lot, coming out of this part of the forest here. And we don't really want much on our lot to be much bigger than the trees behind us. So like this one, we might actually want to size down to keep with the scale of what else is happening over here. We also want to pay attention to how these are spaced around us. Looks like we do have some tighter clumps over here, so we could do some of those, as well as some more spaced out areas over on this side, so we'll definitely want to do a mix. One downside to using debug, especially without any mods, is that you can only place one item at a time, and you can't eyedropper them. Why can I see, like now I can't find this tree. Now I am resizing with the end bracket keys on my keyboard. Here are some other controls for that. And I know I want these to somewhat mimic this layout over here, so they're going to be fairly close together. So there are some, I'm not sure if these are fir or spruce or what type of evergreen they are. There are some conifers. We'll call them that. Now we can also see that these are the tallest trees in the landscape around us, so when we move in with these guys, which would be almost the next level of our forest, we want to make sure that we don't scale any of these to be above our tallest conifers. So the deciduous trees will be a little bit smaller and spaced out a bit more, which is going to be quite relevant. So now we have a stand of pine trees, we have a small group of these deciduous trees, and I might place a couple over here as well, slightly more spaced out. And next up we have this little guy, which appears to be another deciduous tree type. What are you called? Just debug. That's fantastic. For the most part it looks like they're about this size, which means we want these on the outside of our forest area. So I might put a couple inside because this would be a clearing, right? Sunlight is getting down here so we can have slightly smaller plants. And I'll also put some on the outside over here and over here. Now I wouldn't want to put something this small inside the pine tree areas necessarily, because first of all you're not really going to be able to see it, and that means that the sun won't be able to see it either. Now in the game, of course, we aren't going to pack trees quite as tightly as they may be in the real world. Just for gameplay purposes, it's going to be very difficult to see, difficult to get screenshots. Yes, they fade out of the way during gameplay, but a lot of us here are builders and we just don't have the mental space for dealing with a bunch of trees on the lot. So this is about as heavily treed as you'd want a lot to be, but don't worry, there's a lot more we can do to make it feel a lot more dense. So if I bring up my graphic again, we've pretty much done the like tree types, and we're going to move on to the undergrowth, the shrubs, and stuff like that. Pretty much still continuing that slope of tall down to short as we move toward the sun, and therefore toward more flowering and fruit-bearing plants. Now again, in Debug, you should be able to find a lot of the plants that are in the world already, like these shrubs, and also rocks, which I should take a minute to talk about, but I think I'll deal with the rocks when we go back to this with terrain manipulation. Right now we're just building up like a base forest. Also, all this to say, you can definitely use the like normal build menu stuff as well. It's just if we're focusing on getting our lot to look like the world around it, it's really best to use debug. So like in here, I could pull out some of these grasses and weeds. These shrubs, ferns are common in damp, dark spaces. So with this, we are once again going to start with our taller shrubs more toward the inside and have them starting to grow out. Now, while technically this is more full, it's not exactly inspiring wandering through the forest and proposing, so what can we do about that? To help with the idea that this forest is coming down off a hill, I'm going to grab my terrain manipulation and I'm going to raise a little bit of terrain over here. I'm going to make my brush pretty big, but quite slow and smooth, and start raising some of the terrain under my plants. Now they should raise automatically and we can go through and adjust some of that as we want to. Also, I'm turning off the grid because the glowing green hurts my eyeballs. So there's a little hill. We can also add a little bit of a valley down on this side. Another thing with having a lot this large is we can make really nice gentle terrain changes and it's not really going to mess with anything, which is fantastic. You know, like it's not clipping at the edge of the lot. So there is our new forest with just a couple of movements of terrain. I think this is looking much more visually interesting. Now, if we want to add a little bit of a pond and a river, I'm going to start by bringing my brush down significantly, and I'm going to make a hole here where I want it to sort of start and a hole down here where I sort of want it to end. Now I'll take my flatten terrain tool and starting at one end, start pushing it basically these two holes toward one another. Now one of them will be a little bit higher up than the other, and that is good. We want that to happen. Basically what we're looking for is to get this little smidge of green right here as small as possible. At this point it may be helpful to actually adjust your edge to be significantly harder because we can go through and soften it again later if we need to, because we really want to make this area as thin as possible. That's looking pretty good. We do have some little like lumps and bumps there, so might have to draw across and push in again. You can also check and see how it's doing by adding water, of course. So I'll add some water there, add some water down here, and now we're ready to add some rocks. Now I recommend using the rocks from the world for a few reasons. First off, they're a lot cheaper. Second, they just look cooler. And third, they can often be quite a bit larger. For example, this one rock I should just be able to, with my Alt key of course, carefully place about here, and that's going to solve most of that area right there. If you decide to layer in some rocks from the normal build menu, I recommend trying and getting them to match the tone as best as you can. And what our goal is here is covering as much of this little land bridge as possible. This would also be another great use case for some of your debug bushes. But Sam, I hear you asking, what on earth is all of this for? I thought you said we were making waterfalls. We are. However, the next step to making a waterfall is a little bit more complicated and expensive, so I was putting it off a little bit. But you do need the base of having just a nice big old stack of rocks and some plants. But the next step is bringing a sim to your lot. If you already have sims living on your lot, you can of course use them, or you can use this little car tool here to visit with a sim. So now that you've got a sim on your lot, go back into build mode and you want to grab the spraying water emitter. You just want to place like a whole bunch of these. Doesn't really matter where, you just want a lot. Now when you go back into live mode and click play, they'll start spraying. Awesome, go back into build mode. And now what we're going to do is one by one grab these fountains, rotate them using the keys on your keyboard, move them by holding Alt, and start placing little waterfall droplets. And yes, they disappear as soon as you place them, but this is the life we've chosen to lead, so. Now I like placing plenty right at the bottom, of course. It's going to look super duper cool. You can also raise and lower them by holding them against the terrain underneath, like so, or simply by using the 9 and 0 keys. Once you've completed placing your first round of fountains, go back into live mode, click the play button, and let's see what we've created. Now the fountains do light up, which is a bit of a bummer. I haven't figured out any way to change that. Now we can go through and see, do we have any that are sort of spraying up, like this one here that we'll want to cover? Do we have any areas where we might want to add more fountains, like right here, or right here, to sort of make this accidental multi-direction flow make a little bit more sense? But those are the basics to creating a waterfall. For any fountains that are starting to spray up that you're not really a fan of, you could either move everything out of the way to get at that fountain and move it, or you can add more rocks. I recommend raising rocks by using 9 and sizing them up using the bracket keys, and hold Alt to adjust them until you get not an upright spraying fountain. This is also a great place to start using some more of your plants. And if this isn't a clearing, which ours is, they can even be flowering plants. Now again, I am not a botanist, I'm not a forestry specialist, I don't know which plants would make the most sense for growing on waterfalls. But I do know they are incredibly handy for blocking little oopsies, so just stick them in there. It'll be fine. And with the same techniques we discussed in the last video, you can hide some of the edges of these rocks with plants, more rocks, flowers, all sorts of things. Apparently my sim is leaving the lot. Anyway, back to the matter at hand, let's finish off some of this edge of the pond here. We could just leave it raw, I guess, if we wanted to. Oh, I don't need these fountains anymore. Or we can just continue to stack rocks and bushes up against it, smooth out some of the edges. Overall, it's just going to be more of the same. Now, if you'd like a more in-depth, slowed down video of any of the topics that we're covering here, not specifically related to forests, like a waterfall and stuff like that, let me know in the comments down below. I may either be able to direct you toward a video that I've made in the past or add it to the list of things to cover over the summer. Lastly, I want to talk about water styles over here. Well, not lastly for now, I would like to talk about water styles over here. Now, since we are in a forest, something that has a bunch of sticks and leaves in it would be totally appropriate. Something sort of green would be pretty fine as well. Something mossy, probably nothing too blue and clear. I think I'm going to be going with the leaves. And of course, we'll finish it off with some terrain paint, but we'll talk more about the rest of the terrain paint in a little bit. So there's one example of a more unique object you can add to your forest, which will help with just overall it not looking like you threw a whole bunch of trees onto the lot. If you're in base game only, just about at the halfway point, you'll find a few sort of log-looking things. We've got this one, as well as this one. And you can plant in these, you can place them next to your water, you can just sort of stick them probably deeper in the forest for the thicker logs, like this one. And I'm going to want to make sure that I have this as close to resting on or in the ground as possible. That looks pretty decent, so we'll leave that there. But one of my favorite logs actually comes from cottage living, so if we sort by that, there's this mossy one, and this one, which happens to have mushrooms and things growing on it, which is just fantastic. Cottage living is just great for adding mushrooms in general. These are very small objects that you can add in the more shady areas of your forest. Just add a little bit, of extra something. It's all about layering textures and colors in here, but they're going to be mostly very boring and bland textures and colors because it's going to be a lot of brown and green. You also want to try and avoid having things float, which I've set myself up very poorly for, just due to me having decided to use terrain manipulation for this lot, but those little details can really add up. You can spend hours and hours and hours decorating a forest. Other fun things to put in as sort of token items to make cool screenshot opportunities and whatnot would be things like old broken down walls or vehicles, old gates, a tree where there's only one of them, like this big dead tree from Vampires, or this Bramblewood Secrets tree, which was one of the early access items, I believe, with the Cottage Living pack. Now, those things look like they could belong. This would not belong. We talked about that a little bit in the last video about trees. You really want to make sure that they at least make sense for the world before you start throwing them in there. We could probably add a few other conifers and deciduous trees as well if we really wanted to shake things up, but I'm pretty satisfied with this so far. Now, one thing I didn't really talk about too much yet was flowers. For the most part, you're going to want to go with wildflower type things like, I don't know, the wildflowers, or the, oh yeah, they're right here, the oopsie-daisies. These things that are just growing straight out of the ground. And if you decide to use something that's more in a bush form, I would go for some of the more raggedy looking ones like these. Debug is another fantastic place to find assorted wildflowers. Type in Debug and just scroll. Start with the world, start with just base game, just take a gander. For example, here are some wildflowers. Again, you cannot shift place multiples of these, so if you find something, you're going to want to kind of sprinkle it around a bit and then go back to your scrolling. Don't just like place one and come back to place more later. Oops, that was a tree. But you want your flowers to be primarily moving toward where there would be more sunlight as opposed to in the deeper part of our woods, which is pretty much back here. So I want the flowers to be more toward the front or toward our clearing in the middle here. Another thing you can do in the forest, especially with weird terrain manipulation and whatever going on, is throw down some rocks. Rocks don't need sunlight to grow. They're extraordinarily economical that way. So you can put some of these bad boys down. When you have too many greens just layered one on top of another, sometimes you just really need something not green to start breaking it up before it just becomes boring. So now that we've got some more rocks down, I'm going to finish placing some more wildflowers and then we can talk about terrain paint. Okie dokie, it's terrain paint time. Under any needled trees like these, I would go ahead and go with the pine duff terrain paint, and you want this to completely cover underneath the trees as these typically have very, very dense foliage and it's generally on the tree year round, so not much is going to be able to grow beneath them. Now I know this is a Sims 4, there's lots of space in here. Remember, we're balancing what we know about the real world with what will actually make sense for most players in the game. So I'm going to go through and place this specifically under all of my sort of pine trees here. And then around the edge of that, I am going to use the Garden Bedlam. I'm going to make sure it's nice and soft because it's not an exact match color-wise, but I'm going to blend this out on the edge and use this to also paint under anything else that I have laying on my forest floor, fill in some of the gaps, go under these plants. And I'm going a little bit lighter on some of the smaller trees because, again, more sunlight would be able to reach the ground, which is sort of the story that the terrain paint tells. Next, I'm going to take this Scratchy in Patches, which is in the grass options, and I'm going to use this to fill in anywhere where I still want your Sims to believe, well, for you to believe that your Sims are still in like a deeper forested part, just because it looks like the grass isn't growing as well here. So like back here, I still want this to be more of my deep forest, so I'm going to splash some of that down over here in the more shady parts, in this sort of little bit almost a clearing here, and along the edges over here as well. There's a lot of terrain paint layering going on today. Now in the more sunny spots, you could grab something like the Field of Flowers, Desert Blooms, Toe Ticklers. This has some flowers sort of texture on it. Now you want to make sure you use a very soft brush on the edge of whatever space you're using this on so that it blends in fairly decently with the ground below it. And I would recommend mixing these up a little bit as well. Otherwise it's just going to look a little bit too much like painted on flowers. But this is a nice way to fill in some of the space as well. Next, if this is somewhere that you actually want your Sims to travel, let's talk about making some paths. I always like starting with some dirt on the sort of underside of my paths. Right, so maybe I just want one going like along the edge of my pond here. So I'm going to lay down some dirt first, and then shrink my brush a bit, make it a little bit more firm on the edges, and then grab my gravel, my rocks with the grass growing through, something like that, and start painting that on top of the dirt. Now you don't have to add the gravel, that would be more of a maintained sort of path. If you actually would rather the path look a little bit more wild, you're going to go quite soft, keep the brush kind of small, and then grab your dirt, and you're going to want to make it a little bit more crooked and not quite as solid, and just have it sort of winding. Now you can make it wind first and then add rocks and things in between, or you can add random stuff that your path's going to have to circumvent and then make it wind around that. Right, like if I add a couple of rocks in a tree, all of a sudden it makes sense that, oh yeah, of course the path has to move in this direction, you know, as opposed to just wondering why it's not in a straight line. This is where I'm going to leave this forest for now. We're going to come back to talk about adding like magical, fairy, whimsical energy, but for now I'm going to upload this specific lot that you see before you up to the gallery, and then we are going to move over to Sulani because I want to do something in a very different climate, but use pretty much the exact same method. Because it's the same method and you're going to get the same quality of results. They're just going to look a lot different. So here, right, we're going to go into Debug and we're going to find some of the trees and plants that we see in our little forest-ish scape around us. So we of course have the palms, tall and small, and these trees with the red flowers on them. So if I want this forest to again sort of start toward the outside of the lot and move inside, then I'm going to start placing my trees, the taller ones toward the back, the slightly shorter ones more toward the front, and try to have them overlapping to the world around it as well. Now it looks like this tree has actually been sized up in the world around, so we can grab one sized up, and I lost it, there it is. One like more than normal size to pull in a little bit. Now most of these trees are actually available in the main menu as well, but one of the reasons I really prefer using the debug menu, first of all, you can actually get a couple of different swatches in some cases, which is fun, but they're free. Free is awesome. But anyway, it's as simple as that. To get started, we have our taller trees toward the back. We're looping the trees around to the front a little bit, but remember, just like we discussed in the other video, you don't want too many trees in front of your build. It's going to block gallery screenshots. Now the main difference with the tropical area is you're going to notice there's a lot more dense sort of undergrowth under everything, so you don't have to be as hesitant to keep it more toward the edges of the forest. Also, palm trees just generally let more sunlight in, and there's more sunlight to go around. So I'm going to size some of these up for more dimension in the landscaping and push them back. This also makes it easier for them to overflow off the lot, which is fun. And then add some smaller ones toward the front, as well as these small sort of light pink flowers that we see here. Looks like they also come in a red swatch, so I'll add some of those as well. So at this point, I'm just trying to copy the landscaping I see around me, which is a lot easier with the debug menu. Now next up would also be some bushes, which we don't really have a lot of bushes, but we have these plants and these plants. So we'll use those the same way, starting to come away from the main trees in our little forest scape and not be completely under them, but still providing some shade to the next level, which would be more flowers. Now, just like with the other landscaping, you could totally do some terrain manipulation. I'm mostly going to recommend adding rocks. Now, specifically, this area is surrounded by rocks, so that helps a lot. But even if you just use the normal rocks and you don't go into debug for them, making sure that you add some large black rocks in the island living world is helping to make it look a little bit more like it's attached to a volcano, which most of the world is. Also, because the colors are just so much more saturated here, it's going to make a little bit more sense to have the darker rocks as opposed to the lighter rocks in the less saturated, more temperate forests. Now, if your lot is absolutely huge, you could probably get a whole like mountain range. In fact, I could actually place this here off the lot. How fun is that? It's a little bit obnoxious, but pretty cool. Now for terrain paint, I am again approaching it slightly differently, but overall it's mostly the same, which is I'm going to use some dirt under most of it. And any areas that I want to feel more shaded, I'll bring the dirt out farther. Any areas that I know are going to read as more sunny, I'll leave the dirt in closer to the edge of the plants. Also, if it feels like I'm going to be rushing any of this, if you've been around the channel for a minute, you probably know I have a handful of health issues, and for whatever reason, I feel like a lot of pain is coming, so I'm trying to get this done so I can just sit down, but I also really like landscaping with you guys, so we're going to do the video anyway. But overall, what I'm just doing is painting along the edge here. Now I want maybe more shade in this area right here, because it is sort of blocked by a rock and some trees, so I'll put slightly heavier terrain paint there, and of course under everything else as well. Now we could go through and add a little bit of the sort of partial grass, partial dirt along the edge if you wanted to soften that up, just help it look a little bit more natural, less like you're actually edging this space with your weed eater. Also, if anyone wants to know what the health issues are, I don't know yet. We're still working on that. Anyway, so here is this. Let's talk about some of my other favorite objects from this debug menu, you know, like your thing that looks cool, right? Like we had the fallen logs in the other one. Now we already have a giant rock face, but over here, there are some really cool objects like some of these sculptures, which is definitely not a natural formation. This would have been put here, but it's still really cool. And there's like an old stone jungle version as well. There are also some more brightly colored plants that you could use a little bit more sparingly. And these are probably one of my favorite debug objects. Your Sims can walk right over these, which makes for some fantastic walkways. You just sort of like lay them one after another like so, and then you'll go in, of course, and grab some terrain paint and paint under them because we're not animals over here. A little bit of sand probably. Oh, that's the other thing, is you could use sand instead of dirt if you wanted to. I would reserve the sand for the lots lower down closer to the actual beach and more of the soil color terrain paints up here. But this can be a really fun, like, you know, for like a wedding or something. Although, if I remember correctly, you have to make sure that the wedding arch is not intersecting with that small green square because I've done that before and then the wedding doesn't work, so it would have to be like at the end. I love landscaping in Sulani. If I was feeling any better, we'd probably spend another 20 minutes here, but we're going to move on to fairy garden style landscaping. First, of course, I will also upload this lot to the gallery, so those of you who don't like digging through debug and or just want a beautiful lot ready to go can grab this one up. So to take this from basic to magical, we're pretty much focused on adding things. We want to add oversized objects, brightly colored objects, and glowing objects. I'm going to start with the mushrooms, the alien mushroom 1A to B, which is from the Get to Work pack. Now these glow and they are so cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to size some of these up and put the slightly larger ones deeper in the forest, like they'd have more time to grow. So I'm going to put these back here. And I'm going to take some of the normal size ones and put them more like with our flowers, and take some smaller ones and place them more towards the edge, like over here. They're still definitely oversized, but if we switch over to nighttime, you can see that they glow. So while we're talking about glowing things, there's also this alien flower, which I'm just sort of going to tuck in with some of my existing wildflowers. This one you won't be able to tell quite so much during the day, but at night it'll definitely help everything light up and glow just that little bit extra. Oh, I also forgot to mention this earlier, but you should totally put stuff on some of your rocks. You can just raise it up using the 9 key, and now we have mushrooms on a rock. There are also these alien objects which glow as well. Some of them are a little bit interesting looking and would be more for layering inside other things like this. And then there are these sort of tendril looking things which I would add in some of my grasses. The fountains in the waterfall again do light up. That is like the one downside of using the fountain method to get a waterfall going. Everything else is upsides though. Next up, if you have Realm of Magic, I'd like for you to sort by that. And we're going to search Debug over here because Realm of Magic has giant glowing crystals. How fun is that? Now, I'd love to add some of these into our waterfall situation. Maybe actually delete some of the rocks and add the crystals instead. Getting all sorts of magical up in here. Oh, as always, take what you like, leave what you don't. Maybe this is a little bit too much for you. I think it's pretty fun, but I could also see why this could get out of hand very quickly. So if you're just looking at this and you're like, I do not think of crystals when I think of magical landscaping, no worries. Most people probably don't. But it can hopefully still spark your imagination for future builds, even if you don't copy exactly every single thing that's going on here. Now you can also add just like normal crystals from the build menu, which I'll show you in a second, which don't glow. You can put like lights and stuff in them. How fun is that? Look at that. Delightful. I need something glowing over here. You can find the normal crystals by going into decorations, and it's in miscellaneous, I believe, and then you can actually find some of these. Some of them glow a little bit, some of them don't. But this is like where all of your sort of normal crystals are. Oh, here are some purple ones as well. Obviously we need some of that. Anyway, here are the normal crystals, which you can see do not glow, but you can still resize them and actually put like little lights inside them. So if I go over to lighting, where is it? Is it under miscellaneous? These little guys, these little spotlight things, you can actually just stick them under the crystals and then they sort of glow, so that's fun too. It's not quite as vibrant a glow as the other ones, so that may be more to your liking anyway. While we're in miscellaneous lights though, from the Strangerville and the Jungle Adventure packs, there are actually colored lights. Now these little boxes don't actually show up like in live mode, so if you wanted to add the illusion of some more interestingly colored lights, you could definitely do that as well. I don't think I'll be adding these in particular. I have some other ideas, but they are there if you prefer adding an eerie colored glow. Now the other lights I'd like to add would be these string lights, which you can get from the little campers kit. There are also some in the miscellaneous from the free gift kit, these little fairy lights as well. And you can hang these from other objects, so from trees, from rocks, things like that. Now that would obviously be like human added. There are also strong lights that I really like in the cottage living pack. So if we go into cottage living and search for Debug again, there's this single string of lights which is next to these standalone tree stands. So if you don't feel like placing all the trees manually, you could get a collection there. So this is just a string of lights which you can hang from tree to tree, which would again make it look more like a venue and less like just a magical place that you happened upon, but it could still be good if you want your sim to maybe prepare for a proposal or something. We can hang some lights in the trees. There are also these hanging lanterns, which are some of my favorite things. Now they do place off center and I'm not 100% sure why, but I'll place the little green square off to the side and then raise them up. So now I've got some lanterns in a tree. Now more toward the top are two more of my favorites, which are these, which are actually 3 of the string lights just all together already, so I like to raise those and have those hanging from tree to tree as well. Looks like I didn't quite raise that enough. Again, these can be a little bit tricky to get placed properly, but it is so worth it, especially if you'd want to host like a wedding or something here. It's just, they're beautiful. And then this one, which is wrapped around a tree trunk and then going up into the leaves. Now this can be a little bit difficult to size to the tree that you need because I'm not 100% sure which tree it belongs to, but it looks like it would fit on this one all right if I rotated it around a little bit. So there, now my tree suddenly has lights on it. Now even in the daytime, it definitely looks different. You could also add more, especially if you don't have some of these packs. Another great way to just add more fairy-like charm would actually be to just go through and oversize some of your standard flowers, like these wildflowers. Start scaling those up just to make things bigger, like there's some magic here making things grow. That can help as well. And finally, because I neglected it earlier, let's talk about the pond stickers. So these stickers you place in build mode, and then the sticker itself disappears when you're in live mode, and it's just whatever the thing is that you put down. So if we put some swans here, we won't see that sticker when we go into live mode, but we will see the swans. And they don't just have to go in ponds, they can go anywhere. Like I am going to absolutely spam this place with fireflies. Now, fireflies fly at a specific height above where their little thing is, but you can actually place them and raise that with the 9 key, and then you'll get more fireflies floating around at different heights because their height is determined by where the sticker sort of starts. So if I go like this, now instead of just having fireflies at the base of my tree, I'll have fireflies all throughout my tree. I'm literally just holding 9 and then clicking at random intervals to get a bunch of different heights. And we will bring a sim back here once again to sort of show you how it's all coming together. So there's one last look at all of our stickers. Now let's bring a sim here and get it to be nighttime. This time I'm visiting with a family, so if somebody goes to work, we don't just all abandon the lot. So this is how it's looking so far. I probably should have added a restroom. It's fine. I just need somebody to be here. Oh, there we go. So the real magic seems to happen after 9:30. Now we've got everything lit up. So, to recap, try and use the plants from the world around you as much as possible. You want to make sure that you're putting your trees close enough together that the tops are touching a bit, but you don't really want them so close together that you're going to risk having gameplay issues, because this is a video game after all. You want to place your taller trees toward the back and your slightly shorter trees toward the front and or toward any clearing that you may have in the middle. Now this will always work better on a lot that is slightly larger as well as a lot that has more like trees around it to begin with. But really anything from a 20 by 15 all the way up to this 64 by 64, you can use some of these to get a more forest-like feel on your lot. And the same general concept applies to whatever world you're building in. If you missed the last video, I did a deep dive on all of the basic concept of landscape. So if you felt like you were missing something in this video, you might find it in that one. Don't worry, everything's broken into chapters because it's a really long video, so it'll be a lot easier for you to find the information you need. And if you did see that one already, check out this video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. Thank you so much for landscaping with me today, and don't worry, I do still plan on releasing the cottage style landscaping video this month, so don't forget to subscribe and come back for that one. I look forward to landscaping with you again very, very soon. Bye!